Hi, I'm Josh, and I cut my hair, even though I was planning to keep it long at least until my birthday in April so that my head would stay nice and warm over the winter. But I just got so sick of the hair, I just had to get rid of it. Do I like the current style I've got? Well, I'm not here to rate haircuts. I'm here to talk about a book called Bookshops Bonedust by Travis Baldree. This book is a prequel to a book I have previously read called Legends and Lattes, and I do have a little spoiler-free review of that up. I had given that book a fairly generous 8 out of 10 rating, although it's probably more like a 7 out of 10, but basically, it was a decent book. I enjoyed it. This prequel here follows the same main character, Viv, who is an orc. In the first book, Legends and Lattes, Viv had just retired from being a D&D style adventurer, and she was setting up a bakery in town. In this book, she is, I think, just starting into her adventuring days. And to give you just the briefest non-spoiler version of the plot, she is basically setting out on this adventure with an adventuring party. She is in combat with some creatures. She gets injured and she gets kind of waylaid in this little seaside town to heal from her injury while the rest of her party goes on with their quest. And so Viv is stuck recuperating in this town. She ends up getting to know this ratkin lady who owns the local bookshop, and alongside the ratkin sort of helps the lady kind of spruce up her bookstore. She kind of discovers the joy of reading for herself, and things happen. Now, I ranted a little bit in my review of Legends and Lattes at the fact that a lot of people refer to it as cozy, low-stakes fantasy. And while I agree that it is quite cozy fantasy, I strongly disagree with the term low stakes, because both in this book and Legends and Lattes, there are people actively trying to kill one or more of the main characters. And yes, the average fantasy novel might have much higher body counts involved than these little fantasy books. However, if somebody was trying to murder you, I don't think you would call that a low-stakes situation. In fact, I would say it's probably the most intense thing that's ever happened to you. I hope nothing worse than that has ever happened to you. So yeah, I don't say it's low stakes per se, but it certainly has a coziness to it in that a lot of what's going on in this story is just kind of day-to-day living type of stuff. Going kind of hand in hand with this cozy day-to-day setting, just like its predecessor, this book didn't have a lot of really profound things to say about life in general. It did have kind of one theme of sort of the fact that our lives follow seasons, and people come into and out of our lives for different seasons at different points in our life. And I think part of life is struggling to know at times what is appropriate and best for your relationships based on where you currently are at in your life. And so it kind of explores that idea a little bit, but beyond that, it was a fairly fluffy book, I would say. And that's fine. It's not trying to be a deeply profound novel. It's certainly not one of those books where I ended up with dozens and dozens of tabs marking passages that really jumped out to me as I was reading the book. You know, there's only a few tabs here in this book of things that I decided to mark. So, you know, yes, there are a couple of high stakes, but it's not a deep book. And really, I would say it's almost cheating in that it is a book that is appealing to readers, being a book that is about a bookshop and about a character who's discovering the joy of reading and the whole world of diving into fiction and that whole experience. And so you're kind of preaching to the choir, so to speak, when you're writing a book about the joy of reading books, because if somebody is reading your book, I think they're going to probably enjoy that and relate to that as a reader themselves, as I did. So yeah, it's obviously a topic that I enjoy when you're talking about books in a book. The quality of the writing in this particular book was very much along the similar lines to the previous book. It's kind of cute writing in a sense. It's got its nice descriptive moments. It has a few kind of odd similes here and there that kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. So it's not great writing, but it's very good, and it works for the story that's being told for sure. As one example of why I wouldn't say it's especially great writing is kind of later in the book, we have this sentence where our main character, Viv, is thinking about another character, and it says, Viv almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. And then a mere dozen or so pages later, we're in the head of another character, and it says, the plaintive note in her voice almost made him reconsider. Almost. So, just things like that an editor might have been able to pick up on and say, let's not be too repetitious with certain devices that are used in the writing, that sort of thing. But, it's not a badly written book by any means. Oh, wait, there was a couple of quick things I did want to highlight where there were a couple things I tabbed because I related to them to a certain extent. So we have our main character, Viv, who, like I said, is a warrior as part of an adventuring party. And this kind of made me think about my career as a paramedic and how I had to leave that behind. And it says, Viv laughed, but then considered and said, being one of the Ravens, that's the gang that she was kind of adventuring with, being one of the Ravens is living all the way to the edge of things. 1 second in the thick of battle is like a whole day anywhere else. Once you step back from that, she shrugged, everything else seems like a waste of time. And then that leads me on naturally to where I have found myself over the past handful of years, and this little passage that has me relating to kind of where I ended up in the wake of having to leave the paramedic job. And we have our bookshop owner, Fern, the ratkin, talking to our main character, Viv, the orc. And Fern says, it's odd, but I've never actually asked you any real questions. That's pretty God's damned rude of me, isn't it? I've told you more about me than I've told anyone in ages. I guess I haven't had much time for acquaintances the past few years. I'm out of practice. Cracking an eye at her, Viv said, you're in the tunnel. I know how it goes. The tunnel? You're just trying to make it to the other end, and while you're in it, there's nothing to either side. Only the way forward. The tunnel. Maybe when you find a way out, you can look around, but until then, Viv shrugged deeper into the chair. Huh. Fern was quiet for a long moment. So, yeah, that was a very on point to how things have been going for me for much too long at this point. Moving on then to my rating of the book, and things were going along pretty well on par with how I was feeling about the previous book, sitting around that 7 out of 10 sort of. Very good, not spectacular, but definitely not bad rating, until I got to the climax of the story here, and things just went completely sideways in that the thing that they were working up to in the story, without spoiling anything, was a conflict with a particular evil character. And ultimately, the way the characters decided to deal with that situation and resolve it left me really quite confused, because it almost felt like a hand-wavy, because magic, ta-da, it's all worked out now, to the point where I had to go back and reread it and go, what exactly happened here, and why did that work out like it did? And even after rereading it, I was still kind of confused, like, this is so strange. I don't quite understand the whole concept of how this was resolved. And what's really quite funny is that the author seems to admit that it was just kind of an outrageous way to deal with it, because immediately at the end of that resolution, one of the characters who was involved in it says, well, he said, I must admit, I cannot believe that worked. And that's how that chapter ends. The climactic chapter of the book ends with one of the characters who was involved with it saying, I cannot believe that worked. And I, as a reader, was left saying, yeah, me neither. not only that, but just a handful of pages later, our main characters are relating this story to some other characters about what happened and how they dealt with it. And after they tell this character named Rackham what happened, he goes, I'm still not clear on how you blank for spoilers. Essentially, I'm still not clear on how you managed to do that, though, rumbled Rackham. And so even the author seems to be admitting that this really doesn't quite make sense. And unfortunately, because of that, I think I'm going to really give the book about a 5.5 out of 10 rating. It was certainly a relaxing and enjoyable read, but when it got up to the point of the whole final resolution of the climax, it just kind of made me shake my head and go, what on earth is happening here? So that was kind of unfortunate, because I was certainly enjoying the read up until that point. That being said, though, it did wrap up very nicely in the end. It had sort of a kind of a bittersweet ending and epilogue, where it did kind of go into that exploration of seasons of our life and the people that come and go in our lives, and we kind of got into that a little bit right at the end of the book, which was kind of nice. At the end of the day, if you've read Legends and Lattes and enjoyed that book, I'm sure you would enjoy Bookshops and Bonedust. If you didn't enjoy Legends and Lattes, I really don't think you would enjoy this one either. So anyways, I would love to hear what you're currently reading. Have you read any books lately that you've particularly enjoyed? Please do get into the comments and let me know. I want to send out a big thank you to the handful of Patreon supporters who are still with me. I did lose a couple of Patreon supporters after I released my last book review, and I genuinely hope that they discontinued their support of me because they were offended by something I said, and not because they are struggling financially. But regardless of the reason, I do appreciate the support that they had given me for the time that they gave it to me, and I am extremely grateful to all my current supporters as well. So I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you for sticking through to the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers. As part of that, this book, just like Legends and Lattes, didn't have anything big. As part of that, this book, this book, like its predecessor, talking is hard. What was I trying to say?